Hello and welcome to Dialogue. The U.S. has announced a historic $345 million weapons package for Taiwan. The deal comes after many high-profile visits by American officials to Beijing, meant to thaw out the icy relations between the two sides. So how will this latest move by Washington impact those diplomatic efforts? What does the U.S. hope to achieve by changing Taiwan into an ammunition depot? And what could be the consequences, not only for China and the U.S., but also for the Asia-Pacific region and the whole world? To help us answer these questions, I'm joined today by Dr. Xue Chen, Research Fellow at the Shanghai Institutes for International Studies, Peter Kuznick, Professor of History at American University, and Joanna Lei, a former legislator from Taiwan's Kuomintang Party. That's our topic. I'm Xu Chen. Welcome to Dialogue. So, Peter, I will start with you. The $345 million package we know is part of this total of $1 billion US dollar, a whole larger package to be transferred to Taiwan. And also this is done under this President Drawdown Authority, so-called PDA. Tell us, what's the difference from previous arms sales to Taiwan? We know basically every administration sell weapons to the Taiwan island here.
The difference is that previous sales to Taiwan have come directly from the defense sector, but there's been very badly delayed. The United States deliveries is about $19 billion behind in arms to Taiwan. So there are many within Congress who want to expedite that. So they set up a special provision. It's the same provision that's often used for Ukraine. They are going to draw down from America's own military stockpiles rather than have to go through the long process of requisitioning this from the defense contractors. And so this is going to give Taiwan quick and easy access to these weapons to make up for the delay that's been going on in terms of American delivery, especially in light of all the arms that the U.S. is selling to Ukraine.
Mm-hmm. Joanna, from Taiwan, what's the response from the island, when you see this arms sale is done and the emergency mode? Well, there is we know peace, stability right now across the Taiwan Straits.
Certainly, if you look at the DPP official statement by MOFA, they have issued two statements welcoming U.S. continued support to the security commitment in Taiwan based on Taiwan Relations Act and Six Assurances. So that's the official statement by MOFA. However, if you look at the military and the general response, people were asking, because of the long delay, especially on items that Taiwan has already paid for, and those were deemed as the most important items based on the self-defense assessment, such as the 66 F-16V Block 70, the new delivery of the stockpile is not sufficient to make up the deficiency based on Taiwan's own assessment. That's number one. Number two is we currently do not understand or do not have the full data of what exactly will be delivered. Will they be in concert or in agreement with what Taiwan needs, or is it based on the U.S. idea and its current plan to use different islands and different locations to put stockpiles of the United States around the West Pacific, such as using them for DMO, Distributed Maritime Operation, for LOCE, Littoral Operations in a Contested Environment, or EABO, Expeditionary Advanced Base Operation. These are all new war concepts being exercised or being promoted in the West Pacific in recent months. So we're not sure whether these new items will be in concert with the U.S. plan of a potential war scenario in the West Pacific, or in concert with what Taiwan's self-defense assessment needs.
Well, Joanna, you mentioned in a potential war scenario, I mean, that is devastating. Any military conflicts or war, considering China and the United States both are nuclear powers. Of course, here is is about Taiwan, the future of the island. And do you think the public welcome such a development? Basically, we are seeing the worsening security situation across the straits over Taiwan here.
Absolutely not. The public is gradually grappling with the harsh reality that Taiwan may be pushed into a conflict zone based on current U.S. strategy. However, if you look at the official statement by the DPP government, in all of its agencies and administrations, they all express a sincere gratitude towards the United States for the U.S. honoring its quote-unquote security commitment to Taiwan. So you will hear two very different stories. The everyday people said, there's no need for us to go into conflict. We have managed peace for over 65 years, since 1958. And we also have managed very strong peaceful development during the 8 years of Ma Ying-jeou's regime. However, the official statements heard from outside of Taiwan by the DPP media as well as its agencies is an entirely different story, that Taiwan really welcome a strong U.S. support. We certainly do not want to go into a worrying situation where local Taiwanese will be shedding their blood. And all the current scenarios, like what I read just now, DMO, LOCE, EABO, all requires or involve a land-based war scenario. The land-based war scenario will be using locals in terms of defense, urban warfare, or even lateral warfare, fighting in the near sea. We are looking at a fairly grim situation at this point.
Well, Xue Chen, we know that, of course, the Taiwan story here is a part of the China U.S. Overall relationship, and Taiwan being this one of the, let's say, troubled area between the two countries. Now, with the latest move of more arms sale to Taiwan, what's the impact of the relationship between Beijing and Washington? Given, I mean, this move came right after a flurry of high-profile visits by U.S. Ministers, actually, Secretary of State Antony Blinken, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, and Climate Envoy John Kerry. What do you make of it?
Yes, China has reiterated many times, almost in the high-level dialogues with the U.S. officials, saying Taiwan question is the core interest of China's national interest. So with this often kind of arms sale deal between the Taiwan Authority and the American government, the U.S. government, so it always been a kind of infringement of China's sovereignty and territorial integrity. So from the U.S. perspective, this kind of arms sale only on the so-called defensive weapons. The defensive weapons is help to do the so-called security commitment from the U.S. government to the Taiwan Authority. So in the overall U.S.-China relations, there's always be kind of a free part or free perspective policy to compete, to confront, and also, if necessary, to cooperate. So they just try to separate the Taiwan question from the so-called the part of cooperation between China and the U.S. But it's a totally different perspective from the Chinese side. This is part of the Taiwan question, the part of China's core national interests. It should not be satiable from China's national interests and its sovereignty. This is the basic difference between the U.S. government and the Chinese government. So this kind of differences raise the question that you mentioned.
Well, Xue Chen, China has said in response to U.S. military support to Taiwan, saying that such a move is turning the island into a powder keg and an ammunition depot. Strong words from Beijing, obviously. So what's the response from the Chinese side, to the U.S. Aggressive moves, basically, from Beijing that's detrimental to sovereignty and territorial integrity?
From the Chinese perspective, the Taiwan question is the core of the core interests of China's national interest in the sovereignty. So the Beijing's basic perspective and the bottom line is that we deem the Taiwan question and the so-called the complete reunification of the motherland is a non-stoppable trend of history. So the basic line from the Chinese government is that we doing our own goods and or doing our own thing toward this kind of a complete reunification. Therefore, I do not see much of this kind of so-called tit-for-tat responses for this latest arms sale as a package of this so-called $1 billion arms sale. We just doing our own good, just lay hope on the people in Taiwan.
Can we see, Beijing is following its own agenda in terms of final reunification with the island, right? And
Yes.
Peter, if you look at the U.S. moves, speeding up its military delivery, weapons delivery to Taiwan, to the island, what's the U.S. interest here? Why the U.S. doing that? Despite the opposition, strong opposition from Beijing, as it violates, this one China policy made by Washington, a commitment made by Washington to Beijing.
President Biden is in a complicated position right now. He's been hawkish toward China, but he got distracted by the war with Ukraine. If you look at his advisors, he surrounded himself with China hawks. They came into power with the intention of confronting and dominating China. They hadn't been able to do so, but the Congress is strongly anti-China. The House of Representatives especially is filled with China hawks. They tend to be to the right of Biden. They are more hawkish in their hostility toward China than even Biden and his close advisors are. Biden realized that relations between the U.S. and China had hit rock bottom, and the U.S. tried a reset. And so the U.S. sends over Anthony Blinken, it sends over John Kerry, Janet Yellen, Gina Raimondo. On the one hand, the U.S. is talking friendlier relations and easing tensions. But on the other hand, the U.S. is giving the exact opposite signal, that we're gearing up for a war. And we know that there are people in the Pentagon who think that this is going to lead to a military confrontation. The General Minihan, an Army general, said that the U.S. and China will be at war by 2025, he believes. And other leading Republicans in the House said they agree. Nobody really wants that. However, there are people who are planning for that. And U.S. policy is putting China on the defensive. Xi Jinping had said a little while ago that the U.S. is committed to containment, encirclement, and suppression of China. We've had even stronger comments by Wang Wenbin and others. And so our relations are really heading toward a confrontation. And with this latest drawdown authority that Biden has and providing more arms, as you mentioned, the Chinese response is that this is turning Taiwan into a powder keg and an ammunitions depot, which is the strategy that the U.S. wanted to use with Ukraine. So they're seeing this somewhat as a parallel, but they want to get out ahead of Taiwan, make Taiwan so armed to the teeth that it becomes indigestible for China to try to do it by force. So there are some real hawks in the U.S. Congress right now and among U.S. policymakers.
But Peter, how confident is the U.S. military that in the worst scenario, somehow the U.S. say, oh, we will win the war against China over Taiwan?
The U.S. military believes that the window of opportunity for doing so is closing. There's a lot of discussion in the United States about China's nuclear buildup. There's a lot of discussion of the fact that Xi Jinping just replaced the head of the PLA rocket force, who's in charge of China's missiles. Many of those missiles are targeted to Taiwan, nuclear and non-nuclear. The United States understands that China's military capabilities are growing. The Pentagon has conducted 18 war games between the U.S. and China over Taiwan, and China has won all 18 on paper. The U.S. still believes it could win such a war, but at a great, great cost to the United States, especially to the Taiwanese, to the world economy. It would be a disaster, as we know, and the potential for that expanding beyond the Taiwan Straits is enormous.
Well, will be a disaster. Joanna, it seems like obviously the story is, the story is bigger. Xue Chen, I will turn to you here. The story of Taiwan here is much bigger than the island itself, I mean, because it's a part of the China U.S. relationship. And in the worst scenario, as Peter said, and a lot of people would agree, I guess, people in Taiwan will suffer the most if in the worst scenario, and probably neither side is sure of a victory if there is a military conflict. But of course, for the Chinese side, it's about the national sovereignty. It's about the reunification. What China is doing right now to achieve that goal, we are seeing exchanges for people. For example, former leader of Taiwan, Ma Ying-jeou, was in China. That warmly welcomed. That's a very fruitful, very useful visit to strengthen understanding between the two sides. And the young Chinese students visited Taiwan also, it helps. But on the other side, we do see there's increased military drills by Beijing, right? And also, can we say, prepare for the worst?
Yes, always prepare for the worst. From the Chinese perspective, a overwhelming military force that is a guarantee of the peace and the reunification of mainland and Taiwan. So this is from a Chinese perspective that a overwhelming military force could be a last resort, and also a kind of the hope that we can ensure there will be no secession of Taiwan from the mainland. So this is also a guarantee not only for the peace in the region, but also guarantee there's no any possibility for future secession of Taiwan against from the mainland. But I should say this is, as I said, the Chinese government has iterated many times. We lay hope on the people in Taiwan. Therefore, the civil exchanges is really important. Statistics shows each time when the mainlanders or the Taiwanese people visit the other side, they always will change their original thinking a little bit on the other side. There's a kind of a peaceful coexistence and also peaceful development is rising due to this kind of civil exchanges. It also lay a very important perspective for a kind of peaceful development across the strait. But for the U.S. side, I should say there always been a overestimation and underestimation. The overestimation is on the possible so-called military force reunification. The U.S. government and its Congress has always overestimated to pop up this kind of tension between China and the U.S. of this kind of so-called military force reunification. But the underestimation is that the U.S. politicians always underestimate the significance and also the importance of the Taiwan question to China's sovereignty and core national interests. This kind of a two-way of miscalculation will always lead to a kind of a danger for the future U.S.-China relations.
Mm-hmm. Well, danger for China-U.S. relationship. But Joanna, here, same question to you. You know, like if you look, Taiwan is a part of this overall China-U.S. relationship. Can we say, you know, some people would say Taiwan is somehow being weaponized against China because that's in line with the U.S. Geopolitical interests to contain the rise of China in a sort of a new Cold War effort here?
Well, that is why I don't think there is a misunderstanding, but there is a very careful calculation. The United States knows in full right, and they know very well that Taiwan, if they move Taiwan, China will react. And that's as simple as that. There is no misunderstanding that Taiwan is the core of core interest, and there's no misunderstanding that once Taiwan has any form, shape of quote-unquote independence move, China will react. And that is the unfortunate fact for Taiwanese. A lot of peacemakers like Ma Ying-jeou and lots of my friends are trying very hard to steal the island away from the jaws of war, because war is a no-win situation in Taiwan. Taiwan is an extremely small island. There is no way for us to wage any kind of homeland defense without huge casualties. So there's a no-win situation. Peacemakers on the island are trying very hard to move the needle between Taiwan and mainland China to the friendly co-development phase. However, the United States is an extremely powerful force, like a rapid river running down to a fall. And it has a very strong power forcing the development of the future into a very dangerous zone. And unfortunately, DPP is currently the elected government, officially represents the whole of Taiwan and all Taiwanese. No matter whether people believe or not, the international community keep telling us that your government tells us that they need international support. But for locals and for people around the area, we just have to look at Ukraine. You understand that once a war breaks out, no matter what happens, Ukraine is forever destroyed. The beautiful Ukraine that we knew before February 24th last year is not going to be a reality until a very, very long time from now. A long and painful redevelopment and reconstruction after the war will have to happen before Ukraine comes back to any shape or form of a peaceful country. So Taiwan knows its fate once a war broke out. There is no win, and Taiwan has one last chance. That is January 13th. In the next election, there is a final chance for Taiwan to express that they do not want, for Taiwanese to express their unwillingness to go into war and the unwillingness to move away from peaceful co-development with mainland China. The final ability to say people across Taiwan Strait can and should manage our future and our fate by ourselves. And that is January 13th, the last chance for Taiwan.
The election, upcoming election next year, early next year. Joanna, earlier you mentioned about, there was peace and stability across the straits, under the Ma Ying-jeou government, and there's expanded cooperation between the two sides, very warm relationship at that time. What happened? Why now there's a, less than warm relationship, let's say, under the DPP government?
Yeah, well, that is why it's unconscionable that we should be even talking about war, because we were able to manage agency to agency high-level meeting 11 times. Direct agreements between administrations for over 22 kinds of agreements. So even when we had our differences, and even when the differences were not resolved once and for all, people, leaders across Taiwan Straits were able to manage peaceful co-development. And that is very important for us to remember. But after 2016, when Tsai Ing-wen became the elected leader, first of all, everything related to the 92 consensus, that is, you have an agreement of a one China, even though there are different interpretations, that 92 consensus was never officially approved or recognized by the Taiwan administration. And following that, in the more recent years, especially after Biden, starting from Trump, but especially after Biden, there were one after another legalistic recognition of a Taiwan that is separate from China. So America is moving the needle to a very large extent, and Taiwan certainly have worked in concert. So it takes two to tango. The Taiwan independence government, independent movement, has used a U.S.-China conflict to promote its own agenda and pushing the quote-unquote Taiwan independence agenda forward. And that is the absolute no-no, the red line, red zone for mainland China. So we are in the current state based on a dance between Washington and Taipei. The dance between Washington and Taipei has moved beyond the most important foundation that gave us peace and co-development during 2008 and 2016. They have moved very far away from those foundations.
Mm-hmm. With the changes inside the island, of course, that will have the effects across the streets and overall relationship in this region. Peter, many say the U.S. benefits a lot from the Ukraine conflict, and one of the biggest benefits, according to a recent Washington Post opinion article, is upsetting its antagonist, Russia. Some say, the Washington would now like to fire up another conflict to contain its competitor here, in this case, China. What's your opinion on that?
The United States looks at it as if it's fighting a two-front Cold War. It was back in 2018 that the United States announced that the main threat to U.S. security is no longer international terrorism, it's Russia and China. And clearly, they've said that China is the pacing threat. So China is the main concern. Russia is a secondary concern. Russia poses a military threat. China poses an economic threat. China is the number 2 economy in the world, soon to be the number 1 economy in the world. If the U.S. wants to maintain its global dominance, which it's had since World War II, then it has to defeat China, it believes. The United States does not approach it the way China does, as a win-win scenario. The United States approaches it as a zero-sum game. If we're up, then you're down. It's a very, very dangerous way to approach things. And as part of the overall militarization we see going on across the Pacific, we see it with the new U.S. bases in the Philippines. We see it with the Quad Agreement. We see it with the AUKUS Agreement. We see it with Modi's visit to the United States recently. Japan doubling its military spending. The Yoon government in South Korea. One after another, the United States is putting into place this kind of system in the Pacific in order to contain China. And it's the wrong approach. And it can lead to war. Nobody who's sane wants to see a war, but the United States believes it can win without going to war if it plays its cards right. And that's an over-militarization of the region and putting China in a very defensive position, threatening what are China's core interests, existential concerns for China, and not for the United States, except for those who maintain American hegemony as the be-all and end-all of America's existence.
Well, with that, we come to the end for today's show. Many thanks to our guests. You can also find us on the CGTN app or on YouTube. I'm Xue Chen. Thanks for being with us. See you next time.